How can I hold both life and death in my heart in a good, grounded way? I've been asking this question since my son passed away in March 2024. And now we are March 2025. 1 year later, a full solar cycle later. And again, we approach the spring equinox in the northern hemisphere, where I am. In the southern hemisphere, it's the autumnal equinox, Ostara and Mabon, respectively. And I find myself, as I usually do, looking to the earth for inspiration. I don't know if I'm seeking answers when I ask questions like this, or if I'm just seeking to ponder more and think philosophically about these big concepts and feelings. Because I don't know if there is one answer. But in this recording today, I am going to be speaking about that a little bit. Speaking about holding both life and death in relation to the equinox. I'm going to be speaking about balance and the middle way and stepping outside of polarization and bias as much as we can. And I'll be sharing about how almost impossible that might be for us as humans. So if that's something you want to join me in, take a pause, get a cup of tea or a coffee or whatever you need to do, and come sit with me. So I'm sitting here gazing out the window. It's rainy and foggy, and the cedar trees are surrounding this home that I'm living in. It's muddy. The snow has mostly melted, and I still have a fire going. I'm sitting with a hot cup of coffee with all the medicinal mushrooms and organic milk, reishi, chaga, turkey tail, all of the good ones. And I'm reflecting on the equinoxes. And honestly, they're my favorite time of year because the whole of Earth is in balance. Isn't that wild to think about? Usually during a solstice, or at some time of year, one country is experiencing winter while another one is experiencing summer, or vice versa. And while we might be on opposite ends of the earth, during the time of the equinoxes, we are all experiencing equal light and equal darkness. We're all experiencing life and death in balance at the same time. That happens twice a year. And it feels special somehow. And I remember a few years ago, I was speaking to a woman in Australia, and I live in Canada. And we were having a chat, and it was the time of the autumnal equinox where I was living and the spring equinox where she is. And we were just speaking about how beautiful this concept is, that we're both experiencing balance, yet I was approaching the darker seasons, the darker time, and leaning into that. And she was about to embark on the warmer time, the time that I had just said goodbye to. And vice versa. I was approaching the darkness that she already had lived through. But I find it so beautiful that 2 times a year, every year, we come into absolute balance. Everything is equal. And not necessarily in harmony, but balance. And it reminds me of this concept of walking the middle path, the middle way. And the middle way is a teaching that comes from Buddhism, as far as I know. And it's this idea to not be too happy and don't be too sad, to really walk this middle path. And it is a practice, because humans often do. We want to avoid the darkness and reach for the joy. And we want to stay in the joy without ever visiting the darkness. But of course, nighttime always comes. Winter always comes. The darkness will find its way. Death will find its way to every human being. There is not one human being that will not reach death. There is not one human being that will not encounter death in some way, whether it's our own or the death of someone that we love, the death of an idea even. And so at this time, we're approaching in the Northern Hemisphere the Spring Equinox, this time of balance, this middle point, this 0 point, right before we inhale the warmer times, we take a pause. And if you notice your breathing, every time you inhale, before you exhale, there's a bit of a pause. And every time you exhale, before you inhale, there's a slight pause. And those pauses equal the equinoxes or the equinoxes, however you pronounce those words. And I come back to this question of, what does the earth have to teach me? How can the earth guide me? How can the earth inform me of finding more balance between life and death? And in the spring equinox, during this time, we've just experienced all this darkness. We've experienced the dark season of autumn and winter. And we are beginning to come out of it. Imbolc, which is around February 2nd, we usually start to notice the increasing of light. And now at the spring equinox, we are rooted and anchored in, yes, the light is returning. Yes, the light is coming back to us. Though the darkness is not gone completely, and we are not 100% engulfed by the light. And we never are, because even on the longest day, we still have time to experience the darkness. It's just not as overwhelming. It's just not as intense as it is at the winter solstice with the most darkness surrounding us. And so we're in this midpoint, this place before we inhale. And at this juncture, we are being asked to pause. Or at least that's how I experience the earth. I experience her and see her and hear her asking me to pause, to reflect on how death has shown up in my life, how it's impacted me, how I've been in relationship to it, and how I have not been in relationship to it. How I have chosen to show up to the darkness within and without, and how I have not. before once again entering this time of light. And for me, the last time we had the spring equinox, I was standing in a crematorium with my son and my partner. We were getting ready to cremate our little boy. And I remember feeling confused because we were at this time of year when the light was beginning to come, and we had been planning on welcoming this little life, this light, as the light was growing and coming about. We had been preparing, just like we do all winter, for the light to return. But in our scenario, in our circumstance, we were standing in a crematorium at the darkest time of our life. And my body was confused. So confused, because I'm holding this baby and I'm rocking him and I'm telling him that it's going to be okay. And I am moving through wave after wave of grief and sorrow and sadness and anguish as my partner stands there watching me, rocking our dead baby. And looking back, I can really see this image of us at the time of the equinox, hurting and really in the darkness and not in balance with the light and the dark, as that time of year typically shows us and offers us. But like I said, the equinox is not a time of absent darkness. The darkness hasn't receded fully, and it never really does. And we just happened to really be embodying the darkness at that time, instead of fully throwing ourselves into the light. And now at the time of anniversary, coming back around, I'm reflecting a lot on the day that we cremated him. And we sat outside in the grass, and I could feel the spring and the melting of the frozenness that is winter. I could feel the thawing of the world around me. I remember hearing the birds and seeing the sun poke through the clouds, and it was still cool, where we had to bundle up just a bit, but we could feel the warmth of the sun on our skin. And I remember looking up, and amidst all of this, amidst all of the signs of spring, I gazed at the crematorium building and saw the smoke coming out of the smokestack. And knowing that that was my son, I felt the darkness commingled with this time of warming. And it confused my body so much because it didn't make sense. My breasts were leaking milk that my body had created to nourish him, and yet he wasn't in my arms. My body, my cells, and my mind were confused. But really, what a teacher that experience was in so many ways. You know, I have a story written up about the cremation and what that was like, and one of the teachings that I had received from that experience. But another one that is coming in loud and clear as we reach the spring equinox again, the 1-year anniversary of cremating our son. This real experience of being in life while holding death in my arms, surrounded by the chirping of birds and the new life singing around me, literally. I remember seeing puppies walking down the street, babies being pushed in strollers, hearing birds chirping, symphonies calling forward the warmer months and the warmer days ahead. All of these symbols of new life, the sun melting the snow, nourishing all of the land around us. And yet, here we are holding death in our arms and in our hearts, my beloved and myself. And that is a teaching of the spring equinox. How can we hold both? How can we hold life and death? And we are asked the same thing at the time of the autumn equinox, the autumnal equinox. Where is there life within death? Where is there death within life, this yin and yang symbol, right? When we think about that image, the yin and the yang, the circle of black and white, and we see this curved teardrop shape on either side, one black and one white, and within each of them, a dot of the other, reminding us that even within the abundance of life, there is death. And even within the hardest grief and most sorrowful pain and mourning, there is life and there is magic. And this is something that a friend of mine has been speaking to me about a lot. She's been witnessing me and holding space for me as I process the death of my son. And she was saying, you know, as traumatic and heartbreaking as Floyd's passing really is, it's also so filled with magic. And that are the equinoxes for me. When I think of the equinoxes, I really do land with, it is the yin and the yang. It is the finding radical balance of life and death. You know, knowing that death informs life in every way. And what I mean by that is death tells us that life is important because death exists. Because death exists, we know that life is important, that life matters, that life is cherished, that life is special, that when we experience something beautiful, we really hold it tenderly and reverently because we know it's not going to last forever. You know, that's why in moments that are so beautiful and we think, oh, I just wish this could last forever. I wish this person could just stay alive forever. But we know that they won't, which adds value, which adds reverence, because we see this will not last forever. And so I will hold on to it and love it as deeply as I can in this moment. And that's how death informs life. Equally so, life goes to inform death. Because when we think about how special life is and all the things that someone can experience, the good, the bad, the in-between, and then we hear that someone passes away, or we go to a memorial or a celebration of life or a funeral, and we recognize, wow, that person is no longer here. Life informs us of what has been lost in the death of someone in front of us, of that person that lay before us. And this time of the equinoxes really does inform us of that balance. It offers us a chance to reflect on how can we hold both. And something that I remember after my son passed away, not one person that I can remember said congratulations. Everyone said I'm sorry and all of these things. But I remember holding him and looking at him after I woke up from a coma. And I had 2 nurses standing at either side. And I looked at him and I just said, isn't he beautiful? Isn't he so beautiful and so perfect? And they just said, yes, he's so beautiful. And so even with death, even with sorrow, there's a question of, can we see the beauty? Can we see the magic? Can we see the light? Oh, that really opened up some channels of emotion. But this question doesn't need to have an answer. Like I shared in the beginning of this recording, I don't think we need to have answers. But I do think it's important to keep asking questions. How do we hold both life and death at the same time? Not just how do we hold life? Question mark. How do we hold death? Question mark. How do we hold life and death? Question mark. As a unit, in togetherness, in wholeness, because they really are together. They really are one and the same. They are 2 sides of the same coin. They are 2 ends of one experience of being human. You know, we are born, we live, and we die. And my son happened to be born and die in the same sort of bubble, you know. But it is this question at the time of the equinox, how do we hold both life and death? And we can speak about the literal mortality, life and death. But we can also speak to, you know, the birth, conception, life, death of an idea, of a project, of a creative endeavor, of a relationship. Everything begins and ends and ebbs and flows and up and down. And every piece of life has these polarizations and counterparts. And when I really think of how do we hold it, it's akin to our breathing. You know, we breathe in, pause for a moment, exhale, pause for a moment, inhale, and on and on and on until we stop breathing one day, whenever that day is. But our breathing, when we inhale, we experience fully that inhale, the expansion. And when we exhale, we experience the contraction. But in order to experience either end of those things, we need to pause and come into that middle space, that middle path, which is the spring and the autumnal equinox, that middle way, that middle path. This Buddhist teaching, I'm pretty sure it's Buddhist teaching, that speaks about walking the middle way. And it means to not go too much on one end and not go too much on the other. And this has been my journey with birth as an example. And it's bled into all of these other areas, every area of my life. And when I had entered the birth space, when I had entered pregnancy, I was very much on one end and biased and very much coming from the perspective of birth is natural birth all the way. And, I'm a holistic health practitioner by trade, and I have, certifications and all of those things. And so, I would take herbal supplements, and I've never really had to go to the doctor for anything super serious. And I've always preferred and chosen to follow natural protocols instead of Western medical protocols for any kind of healing, any kind of injury repair, all of those sorts of things. So much so that I hadn't taken Advil or Tylenol in nearly a decade, maybe 15 years, before this past year, before having to go in for surgeries and repair damage to my body that I had sustained in childbirth, some very severe, very rare trauma to my physical body. And when you go in for surgeries, you need pain relief afterwards oftentimes. And so it was a very bizarre experience to come from being very natural, like natural medicine minded, natural healing, and always choosing that and never choosing Western medicine, to now being super reliant on the Canadian medical system and pharmacology to help me in certain ways. And it's still not my first choice. I'm still not wanting to choose an Advil or a Tylenol if I have a headache. I will go for peppermint and lavender essential oils, or magnesium, or, take a nap or whatever it is. Making a tea, taking some herbs. I will still lean towards that. However, I have come to this middle space of really seeing so many sides of what health is, of what birth is, and actively choosing to not lean one way or another, to not think that, hospital birth is better, or home birth is better, or hospital birth is worse, or home birth is worse, and really choosing to align myself with birth itself, with health itself, knowing that in every circumstance, something different is going to be asked. In every birth scenario, something different is going to be called for. In every injury, a different protocol will be helpful. It is never just one thing. It's never black and white. And this is what I've been really sitting with at this time of the equinox. Nothing is black and white. No hospital is perfect. No midwife is perfect. No free birth is perfect. No one's life is perfect. There is no way to determine one absolute correct way of being, and on social media, I've seen countless videos of people pushing one way of thinking or one way of being, and selling courses or books or ideas, even if they're not selling anything for monetary gain, they are selling ideas of something, instead of just being in this middle space of observation. And of course, as humans, we do form opinions and judgments and biases and prejudice. Of course, we form all of these things, and it's a safety mechanism. It's how we understand things. It's, historically, if one of our ancestors came across a snake with a yellow band on it or a green stripe or whatever it may be, and it bit his leg and he got an infection and then he healed that infection, he's going to think, I'm not going to go near that snake with a green stripe again. And if I see any other snakes with green stripes, I'm going to take a step back because I don't want to get injured again. And so, of course, we form biases to protect ourselves. It makes sense that we do this. And as someone with consciousness and awareness of this, personally, I want to step back from that even more so and say, okay, are there other green snakes with, or are there other snakes with green stripes? Is there any other potentials out there that could prove my bias wrong? And so I've been doing that with birth and with death and with life and with the medical system or natural healing and herbalism and all of these different things. And I've been stepping back and noticing my bias, noticing where they came from. And in my situation, I have the unique experience of being flung into the medical system. And of course I had a choice, and I needed to consent to procedures and surgeries and things like that. But I came from such a strong one-sided experience or one-sided mentality, and then was flung into a journey of massive grief and physical mutilation. And I needed to rely on a system that I feared and did not trust, and was proved so wrong. I was proved by nurses and doctors and midwives countless times. Countless times. There was not one bad interaction since Floyd passed with the medical system. Every single medical professional that I spoke to, down to the receptionists, was astonishing, compassionate, kind, beautiful. Every single one. And every single time I had questions or concerns or fears, or I thought, is there any other, what about this, what about that? Every single time there was patience and education offered. And hey, if you have any other questions, if you have any data, whatever it is, bring that to my attention and we can discuss, and my questions were welcomed, and the time was taken with me to answer all of those questions and to face the fear that I had with the system. And it's been a year now since being thrown into the system in this way. And I bring this up just to share that I didn't want to have an unbiased perspective on the medical system. I was very much fearful of them and mistrustful. I did not trust the system at all. And it was not a system that I was willing to engage with to have them prove me right. I never in a million years dreamt that they would prove me wrong and have such beautiful care offered to me and my partner. And so I was put in a position of, whether it's God or creator or just life circumstance, where I was thrust into the middle path of, wow, I was wrong. And this experience shows that. And it's not saying that the medical system or doctors or nurses or midwives never cause harm. But it is to say that in my experience this past year, I have not experienced a doctor or a nurse or a midwife causing me harm. I have experienced doctors and midwives and nurses praying with me and crying with me and holding me and loving me and caring for me and my partner. That was my experience. And just like every single human's experience on this planet, it is important to hear it and to understand it and to listen to it, because it makes up the whole, you know? And again, I think of this visual of the yin and the yang of, let's say you have so many women have really negative experiences in the medical system, but then in there, you have some women that have really beautiful experiences. Or the opposite, you have so many women with really beautiful experiences in the medical system, and then you've got some that really don't. And we need all of these experiences to inform us of the wholeness that is life, that is birth, that is death, that is whatever it might be. And the spring equinox, the autumnal equinox, this time of balance, reminds me that we are all human. Every judge, every doctor, every nurse, every teacher, every mother, every father, every child, every student, everybody, every body is human. And we are flawed. And we are doing our best. And we are learning. And we can learn from one another and teach one another by sharing our stories, by leading with our humanness. And that's the light and the dark. You know, if light is divinity and dark is human, or vice versa, whatever it might be, you know, I think of this saying that says, remember, child, that you are noble because you come from the stars. And remember to be humble because you are born from the earth. Full body chills, goosebumps all over. And that's really what it is. Can we see each other like that? Can we remember ourselves like that? Can we see the light and the dark in ourselves and in one another? Can we see the light and the dark in the medical system and the educational system and all of these systems that sometimes help us and sometimes harm us? You know, it's not just good or bad. It's good and bad. It's light and dark. It's life and death. And this is something that I've seen we struggle to hold. Can we hold something in its totality without demonizing it or putting it on a pedestal? Can we see someone in totality? You know, can we look at midwifery as an example and say, wow, there's some really great pieces here. And wow, there's some harm and some not so great pieces here. And all of that is a part of the whole. Can we look at somebody and say, wow, that action wasn't great, but they've also done all of these other things, and that's part of the whole, you know? And instead of demonizing them and saying, oh, they did this one very bad thing, so they are bad, can we look at them and say, wow, they've done something bad, or something harmful, or something dark, or something that I wouldn't do, and just allow that to inform us of their wholeness, And their wholeness isn't something that we can fully conceive because we're limited in our perceptions as humans. But these times of equinox, of balance, to me are asking us and inviting us to see the wholeness in everything and everyone, if we can, to the best of our ability. And will that be perfect? Absolutely not, because we are constantly seeing things through a filter that is unique to us, that has been created and informed by all of our previous experiences, by what we were taught, how we were raised, our belief systems, our prejudice, everything. Like everything goes to inform our lens and how we understand something. And so at this time of year, when I think about standing in that crematorium holding the dead body of my son, I can think of and see this mark of death amidst new life that surrounded me so intently. So many women in my community were pregnant and birthing. And I remember even being pregnant thinking, what are the chances that every single baby is going to come out and be healthy and alive? And, I wonder if there is going to be a stillbirth. And I feared that it would be me. And what went to inform that fear was that my brother passed away and was stillborn, one of my brothers. And that was my greatest fear since I was 10 years old was, oh my God, what if that happens to me? And of course, now I am facing that fear. I didn't think I would have been able to survive it. And here I am recording a podcast episode of some kind, and I'm alive. And I have survived it somehow. And I still don't know exactly how I did. Yet here I am. And what I've noticed in the birth space is that we forget that death occurs for a myriad of reasons. And I don't know if the training that birthing professionals receive is sufficient. I don't know if we understand that as a culture because we are so far removed from death and from darkness. If you go on Instagram or Facebook or YouTube even, you constantly see people selling courses or workshops saying, hey, heal your grief, or, spend 3 months and learn how to heal this or move through that. And we can't. That's not what being human is. We're not going to learn how to heal our shame or grief or anger overnight. We're not going to learn how to solve every problem in a single workshop. We're here to experience them. And what I've seen in this culture of let's fix this, let's, 30 days to get rid of whatever awful thing you want to get rid of, we are demonizing the difficult parts of our life instead of creating ceremony around it, instead of honoring it for what it is, instead of learning to be with it and learn from it and gain understanding from it and perspective and awareness and alchemize from it, but not to remove it from our lives. And this is, again, that teaching from the equinox is let's create equal connection to both life and death. Let's understand how intertwined and intermingled they are. Let's land with life and death being equal teachers. Let's come home to this understanding and awareness that the light and the dark are both medicine women, medicine men. They are both here to offer something, and we can hold both with deep reverence and compassion and care. And when I think of the earth as the original mother, and a teacher of these concepts. And the muse of the Tao Te Ching, I fall into this beauty, this understanding where I see all of her creatures, all of her children, birth and die and embrace both life and death so seamlessly, you know. I remember last summer sitting at the riverside with my partner, and he picked up a wood chip and he said, "Look, babe, it's death." And I looked at it and I just cried. Big tears. I cried because he was right. There was death right under the summer sun, by this river, surrounded by all these trees, all of these other signs of life, and yet here was a wood chip. This dead wood chip decomposing. And we had this beautiful conversation about the trees and the rocks and the water and how they understand life and death, and it's familiar to them, and they hold it close and they don't turn away from it, but they learn to live with it in a way that humans just don't anymore, not here anyways. And the earth is always showing us little things like this, big things. She's always offering raw material to ponder, very big concepts, philosophies. She always has a teaching to share, if we only choose to sit and get quiet and feel the wind on our faces and listen. So thank you for being here today as I rambled on, drinking coffee and talking about the equinoxes and death and birth and life and cremation and all the tangents that I went on. If you have any thoughts on the equinoxes or anything that you want to share, any teachings from the earth, from the spring or the autumnal equinoxes, I would love to receive those teachings, and I'm sure everyone else listening would also love to receive your wisdom and your medicine.